Hello and welcome to today's video where we will be discussing the difference between having empathy for someone and enabling behavior. So the word enabling it comes from addiction literature where we look at predominantly codependent dynamics. And in these dynamics, at least one person is contributing towards facilitating, permitting, or enabling destructive behavior. This behavior could be towards the person, as in allowing it, and eventually towards the whole relationship, which becomes very destructive. It's important to understand that enabling is not only likened to addictive relationships, or where one person or both have some type of substance abuse or process addiction, but in any relationship where there is self-destruction or where there is destructive behavior towards others. Now, when we look at empathy is looking at the attunement to someone else's inner emotional world. So understanding where that person comes from and having empathy for them. That is very different than sympathy. Sympathy is a condescending type of dynamic where we look down on that person. So often that person will say, I feel very pitied. And that is where we look at sympathy. Oh, shame. Oh, all of those types of things. Empathy is sitting with somebody. Even if you haven't gone through what they have gone through, you have experienced loss and pain and grief and all of those things. And we can, with a lot of effort, try and understand people from their points of view. Where empathy crosses the line and forms into any type of enabling dynamic is where we have too much empathy for the other person and not enough for self. So where we self-sacrifice in order to help someone understand their behavior and things like that. So I know most of you are thinking, can we have too much empathy? Because empathy is such a positive construct of human behavior. Empathy on its own is a truly life-changing emotion, strength, resource for you to have to connect to others, to get people to trust you, and for you to feel closer to others. The challenge, however, is when you're in a one-way relationship with empathy, and that's where enabling comes in. So let's look at this a bit further. If you have empathy for somebody when they're being very self-destructive or hurtful, or they're hurting you, and you justify the behavior by saying they come from a difficult childhood, or they will tell you that, or they're going through a lot at work, you eventually get into a pattern of allowing and justifying and even facilitating destructive behavior in excuse of their pain and their hurt. Now, why do we do that? It's often through high empath abilities or high empathic constructs within ourselves, when we think very well of people, when we want to get along, we want to avoid conflict. All of those things enable a dynamic with the other person where we let them off the hook of their role in the dynamic with us. So let's repeat that. In order for us to have healthy relationships, we need to have mutual empathic responses. So if I have empathy for you, you need to also have empathy for me in terms of how your behavior makes me feel. Even if it's unintentional, unconscious, unresolved trauma from childhood, you still have to understand how your behavior makes me feel if we're going to have any sort of relationship, friendship, or any type of work relationship. We have to be able to have that dynamic. If you don't have that, you could be, a lot of things need to be taken into account, you could be in an enabling dynamic. Now think of the last time where you saw or felt undesirable behavior towards you and you kind of put it aside and you thought, well, they've got a lot on their plate, they've been through so much, perhaps they don't have the resources I have, like therapy or counseling, or all of those things. So you let them off the hook, and then what happens? The pattern will repeat. So they may say, I'm sorry, or they may say, okay, I understand I need to work on this, and there's no change behavior. Then you are in an enabling dynamic. With empathic relationships, where there's two-way empathy, so that's the more healthy relationship, we have self-reflection on both parts. So self-reflection would mean when we get into an argument or a disagreement, we have to try and understand what each of our roles have towards contribution towards the overall health of the relationship. When you have one person that is so stuck in perhaps their own dysfunction or their own hurt and pain, unresolved trauma, victimhood, disempowerment, things like that, then your needs over time will become eclipsed by their needs. And you are then in a pattern of trying to help and understand and justify beyond having your needs met. Now, this can be very difficult because then you're in an unequal relationship where if you don't speak up and if the person isn't hearing you and understanding from your point of view, then you actually are not helping them. You are contributing towards harm. Now, it sounds really strong because we think, but how can I be harming someone if I'm having or showing empathy to them? Is empathy on its own is not enough to help us move towards growing relationships. Relationships where we grow, where we show mutual love and respect and have boundaries with each other, is it doesn't help people. What it does is it just keeps that person stuck and yourself in a cycle where they are disempowered, they're not moving towards their own help in their own ways and getting themselves out of things that they should. So if we're looking at empathy, when we show empathy to somebody and they are not willing to make lasting changes towards firstly accepting responsibility for their own lives and their own growth and getting out of the problem, but also accepting responsibility for their role in the relationship, that is crucial. So when we have that dynamic over time, that enabling will look like justifying, explaining that they don't mean any harm, it's unconscious, it's unintentional, yet you're staying in the same position. And if we ask you, what did you do about all your unconscious repressed material or your trauma from your past and all the difficulties in your life, I will likely hear an answer that you took more responsibility. That is typical in these types of dynamics where one is hyper responsible for themselves in the relationship and the other isn't as much. Often that person could be in perhaps an addictive substance abuse cycle or low self-esteem, a depression, lots of things where they do need help, but it is their responsibility to help themselves and also reflect on their role in the dynamic. So a good example is, have you ever heard of somebody telling you something really horrific about their childhood? Like if there was huge physical or sexual abuse, huge, when I mean huge, it was devastating. It was so destructive. And so through various things that could have happened, perhaps poverty, lack of support, all of those things, they grew up to be quite a traumatized individual and they spread the hurt. So what happens is they project the same pain onto their partners, their family members, and even their children. And you hear this and you think, well, it's because this is all they know. This is all they absolutely know in terms of this is where I come from, this is what relationships and love means to them, so of course they're not going to do anything about it. But does that make their hurt in hurting others okay? The answer shortly is no. Simplistically, it is no. It is our responsibility to heal our hurt and our wounds from a very, very long time ago in order to self-love and love other people. So when we don't do that, is what we're doing is we're surrendering our fate to our past. It's that ghost in the nursery that follows us, in that unconscious material that in many ways hurts a lot of other people and ourselves. So, for example, somebody that came from sexual abuse and then they perpetuate it with their children or grandchildren is criminally, we have to hold them accountable, because it's not just okay that if you come from trauma or if you come from very harsh conditions that we just perpetuate and say that's okay. Then why do we do this in our personal relationships? There's many, many reasons as to why people tend to do this. Often highly empathic people tend to do this. So they tend to understand the reasons why people do the things they do often. But what happens often over time is they negate their own self-exploration, self-compassion, self-understanding, and they lose their voice a lot. So how do we shift these dynamics from being purely empathic one way? So when we have empathy one way, to shifting it towards coming both ways is the highly empathic person needs to speak up more. They need to speak up and try and see if the other person is willing to hear it, not just saying sorry, but doing something about it. When we don't have the same level of empathy coming back to us, then you have a choice to make. Is often you have to get to the realization that at that present moment, the person in the relationship that you're in is not willing to be in a healthy relationship with you that you want right now. So if you turn it and say, this is the relationship I want a healthy relationship where you can understand my point of view and the hurt I feel when you do certain things, and I would like for us to shift it towards mutual empathy, mutual investment, and mutual hard work. So responsibility on both parts. If the other person is not willing to meet you at that point, and they make justifications, so if they say, well, I've got so much on my plate, and you're putting so much pressure on me, and this is all I know, and they don't make the changes, then you have that choice as to, am I going to limit access to me? So if you need to be in a relationship with this person for practical reasons, co-parenting, any of those things, working for a boss, any of those things, then you need to understand and accept that this person is not going to be willing to change the behavior, and then you can adjust your expectations accordingly and access to you. So how much they are going to have access into hurting you, wounding you, all of those things. If you grant access and you want to maintain some form of relationship with them, then accept that this is the level of investment, mutual responsibility, and empathy that you're going to be getting. And then you need to work a lot on self-compassion and self-empathy and self-exploration as to why this is occurring. So as soon as you start to see all the justifications, stop yourself and say, what is stopping them from doing what you are doing, or countless millions of other people that are trying to heal the pain they have inside them? Because otherwise we just spread the hurt. If you do decide to leave, and you do decide to put distance and accept that this is just the relationship you're going to have, there might be short-term behavior change that you can look at and see if they're willing to long-term hear it. But you need to look at always your deciding factor of what you want to do in terms of granting access, accepting what you can get in this relationship, is how much empathy does the other person have? How much self-reflection does the other person invest in understanding my point of view? Is that's going to be a very good blueprint to understand if you are enabling or if you're having empathy one way. Is, are they really having empathy for the perspective that you have, and are they willing to work with you towards a shared, mutual, respectful, empathic relationship? I wish you all the best, and this is a very big topic. I know it's a lot to digest, but start to think about that and see where it takes you. All the best.